So, hi everybody and welcome back. This is our C++ tutorial series for absolute beginners. This is video 157 and we continue with classes and structs, which we started in our last video or 2 videos ago. So, I said in my last video that you should search a little bit online about the word object and instance and try to figure out what the difference is. If you found a good solution, very nice. If not, then I can confuse you a little bit more about the word object. And the reason for that is because object has more and different meanings in different places. And to show you that, I have here a site which is the object definition in C++. And here they define how and what an object is or what an object should have. And interesting is you can read this by your own. These are the things what you need for an object. But interesting is this line, and here I will confuse you a little bit. So let's read this line here. It says here the following entities are not objects. So all what I read are not objects. A value is not object, okay. A reference is not an object. Okay, when I have a reference, this will be not an object. A function is also not an object. We will define functions later in our classes. Enumerators are not objects, so we can define enumerators in our classes too. Okay, types are not objects. Interesting is a class itself creates a type, right? They are not objects. And now the very confusing part is this one here. This one here. It says here non-static class members are not objects too. And this is very, very confusing. I'll show you in a moment why, but let's read a little bit more. So a template is not an object. We have not talked about this class or function templates, visualizations. Okay, we have not talked about it. Okay, namespace is not an object. We know what a namespace is by now, I hope. And a parameter pack is not an object. These are the most time this dot, the 3 dots that are most marked as a parameter pack. And this word, this is special in C++. We will talk about this one as well within classes soon. But before that, we go back to this non-static class members are not objects too. So why is this very, very confusing? Because the reason for that is a non-static class member means just, for example, if you declare a variable, it is not, and this variable is not non-static, then it is, and you declare it within a class, it is a class member and it is not an object. Let me make you here an example. And here I created here a class house, and here I have a struct car, and we learned that struct and classes are almost identical, that only the struct has a public access specifier by default, which means if you provide nothing like here, it will have public accessibility. It is public accessible, and the class is by default private accessible. But let's go to our variable member. Let me create here a variable member, std, for example, string, and let's call this one, because I have here a house class, let's call this string a house name, and let's give a default value, for example, funny house. I don't know. And then let's create here one more variable, which is a member of this class here. And this member is again not static, right? Because we have not here the word static. And let's call this house number. And you can see this words which I choose here are all related to this house, which means I put all time variables which belongs to this house in this as a member. So not related things I don't put in. And let's make here the number 19, for example. So, and what is now so confusing about this one? If you learned objects and instances till now, would you say now this is an object or not? Normally you would say this is an object, but per definition here, a non-static class member, if this is right, this is a non-classic class member of this class house. It is not static, it is a member. And yeah, we have not an object here. Interesting, right? Very confusing. So I hope I confused you a little bit more than I should. And now, what can we do about this? First of all, I will do nothing about this because we will see later what an object is and instance is when we come to the places where they will be differentiated. But before that, I give you a very simple solution for that. Or let's say we will treat it as a starter, very simple. And how we can treat objects, instances, or what this kind all is very simple. First of all, you have just think in two terms. One is a class and one is an object, and an object is most time just a variable which we can use. So with other words, when we talk about classes like here, we are just defining a construction script which we can't use, and that's very important. We can't use classes. For example, I want to use this class house here directly. I can't use it directly. Class house and then access member. This dot is an access member access, and then I want access to this house name. You can see I can't do this. So with a class itself, what I want to point out is we can't work, which means we treat classes just as a construction scripts, which means we will all what we need, but we can't work with it. After that, we go to the second part, which is an object, or I call it just a variable, and we can work with variables. What we did this all the time, right? Here, this int house number, and then assigned here default value. Now, this variable name here, house number, we can work with this int now, right? This int is our class. This is a primitive type, but it's also a class. And you can assign it 19. Later, I can assign to this house number 20, 30, or what I want. And the same goes with this class house what I have. This house is just a type later, and I have to create a variable, which is my objects. And the important part is, as a starter, we can work with it. So with classes, we construct, we can't work. With objects, we can work. Let's make an object and which means we create a variable. All time when I say an object, as in this beginner tutorials, it means we create just a variable which we can work on. So let's make it. Let's make a house variable, and I call it variable more than object because variables are more important than the term object, because we are sending variables, we are using variables, we're changing variables. And the thing what I said at the start of this beginning, we are only working with variables, and variables is just a synonym for information, right? Where we are working with information. Variable stores this information, and the same goes for this class. So when we have here a class, we don't work with it, but when we create from a class now a variable, let's call it house. In this case, I call it my house because it's my special variable, and like old time, make a long name, very descriptive name. In this case, my house is okay because I use now the class house because I can't use it directly. I have to create a variable, and a variable is our object. That's it. That's our declaration. And you can see if you treat these two terms this simple, it is very easy to think instead of thinking all time, what is an object here, what is an instance, and all this kind, because this is more a practical way of thinking. In practical way of thinking, you don't think too much. You think simple, fast, and concentrate on your work. And your work is normally to program your tasks and not to think about much. But one thing more, in theory, you have to distinguish this a little bit more. If you go a little bit more in C++ theoretical parts, and when later you will see that you should differentiate this a little bit more. And important is, like I said, here we as a starter, we will treat it just class, So don't worry if you read class, it means in our case all time a construction. You put all things in what you need, let's say what you need later. And later, after you created an object which is most time just a variable which stores our information, then we can use it. Object means here create a variable which you can use. So the important is here this use, you can use it. Here you can use it, here you can't use it, here you can just declare it. And the word instance is also the same, like you can use it. If you have an instance, you can use it. If you have here an object, in this case, in our case, we say we can use it, right? So we make it very simple. And now I show you that I can really use this variable, because this class here I can't use, but I can use now this variable here. Very simple. How I can use it? For example, here I have declared two member variables now. For example, this house name is a member of this class. This house number is a member of this class. That's why they are called now member variables. And now I can use it, right? I can write here my house. And one more thing. Here I declared default values, but these default values are normally not used. These are just here. Yeah, like it says, it's default. Only if you want to use the default values. Most time you want replace them later. And here you can see I created now a special house. In this case, it's my house. And my house name is not funny house actually. My house name is, let's call it, or let's change this member variable here. House name, I go to this, and here again I use this dot here. This dot is this member access. This dot means I access now this class here. And you can see I can use this variable to access it. Class, I can't work with it, but with this variable I can work. And now I change informations in my case, and I set to house name. What is my house name? First of all, I have to go exactly to this point here. And this member access here means, okay, what you want change, because perhaps you have defined here many things. And this member access, okay, what you want? I want this house name now. All right, then write the house name here. All right, let's write house name. And you can see I write now the house name. Now with this member access here, I'm exactly at this point now here. And now I can assign it a new value, because now I'm talking about my house, and this my house is a new object, like they say, because I created something new, special for me. All right, and let's call it this time Coder's house. I call it Coder's house, and I assign it also a new value, because my house number is not 19. Let's assign it also a new my house dot this time I want access this one here, and because it's public I can access it, because it would be here in private I could not access it, but it is public, I can access it. And let's call it here, what was this house number? I need this house number, and you can see there are pop-up menus, which means you can choose all the public available options. In my case I have only 2 now here. And I click here on this house number. Later you will see that this pop-up menu is very long, depends on how many variables you have declared in your class. And I set it here, for example, to, let's say, to 22 is my house number. And so what I have made here, let's think about it. Again, I have created a class, and this class house name is very general. It is just a house, but this word house is very general. It can be so different. There are different kind of houses, right? There are big houses, small houses, and so on. But important is I can make it a specific house. For example, when I declare my own house here, I create a variable, my house, and then I can set properties. For example, the house name, it's now my Coder's house. I can set the property now. The house number is now 22, but of course I can create here another thing, house type. Let's create here one more, as it is string house type, because there are different house, and I call it by default, it's a small house. let's call it house type. And now I can of course access my house is, for example, my house here is house type. You can see I set it to a skyscraper. Skyscraper, for example, just for I don't know if this is right. Skyscraper. Sky house, let's call it sky house. I don't know how to write skyscraper. Sky house, whatever. Now I have a sky house. Anyway, that's you can see now I have created one variable, but this one variable now has here a special meaning. And why is this so special here? Because I create now with house another variable and yes, and create a different house. For example, let's make it very simple. Instead of writing all thing again, I copy this one, I create one more variable, but this time, of course, I can't use the same name here. That would not compile. Let's see. You can see you can't use the same variable name. We learned this. Let's call this Wonder Woman's house. Wonder Woman's house. You can see I use all the time this name Wonder Woman, Coder, and so on. This time Wonder Woman has has a house too, right? And of course I have to use Wonder Woman's here name because I can't use now my house here. That's bad. Let's make this one replace this one fast because I'm a little bit lazy here. And now you can see Wonder Woman's house is not name is called let's go the house name here, super strong house, a super strong house. And the house number is here 999 because it's a very big house. And Wonder Woman's house is where is Wonder Woman's house? I don't know. Let's call it in house type is castle. Perhaps she got a castle. I don't know. And you can see now what I did here. I created here two objects. Here one object, a second object, and the only real thing, and like I said, we as a starter in practical way, we don't really think in objects. You can think in objects, but it's more a variable again. The all time the same thing. What we did at the start, what I said, the most important thing in programming are variables, because variables are sent, used, changed, and they are transferring the information. But in this case, they are called objects because you can make now special cases. Important is when we talk about objects like all time, we are more referring to this class. You can create a class on your own. And then you put and throw all your functions and variable names which belongs to this class in this place, and then it's easier to understand. Our thinking becomes very easy because when I read now house, okay, this is a house, and if you know this house class, of course you have to analyze these classes now, and that's also a little bit new what we have to learn as a starter, that when you read a class, which we have never done till now, like so, this type here, this type is this type here, it is called type, but this type is has a class, and this class you have to analyze. Analyze means you have to go and open up this class, read all the things what this class has defined, and then you can use it. And that's a big job actually. Because you will see there are so many classes defined. For example, this in this library, which we talked already, this STD, the standard library, has defined many classes. One of them is string, and normally you have to go now to the string class and open it up, and you will find they got also something like this, the class string. And then it starts with this open, close brackets, but don't open it up yet because we have to discuss more things about classes. It's a little bit too complicated, but let me see if I can open up here again. Let's see if I can peek definition. Yes, they are using things which we have not discussed yet. We skip this part. But in future, what you have to do is when you read, first of all, this is creating your own class, but later you will see there are many classes you have to analyze, learn to analyze these classes when we are finished with classes and structs. And here, one last word again to our confusion part. You can see a non-static class member is actually this kind of stuff. And they say they are not objects. This is still strange, I would say. But like I said, forget about instances and objects and so on. Just think simple and straightforward and very fast, which means classes you construct, define all rules and all things, but you can't use it directly. That means class. You can't use it, but you have to analyze it. That's also very important because, like I said, now you will see this type here, and to understand this type means most time you have to open it up, go to this class, read what this class offers for you, and then you understand the class, and then you can create an object here. After you have understand this construction, then you go and create a variable, which is then your object. Then you can use this class, but only after you analyze it. And interesting is, for example, when we started here, this line here, this int is a primitive built-in type, and built-in type means this is also actually a class, which is only built in C++, which means you can call it from everywhere without this resolution operator and so on. But actually this int here is also defined anyhow, so that you can only use here numbers. And yeah, you can see you can make now your own definitions what you can use. And important also is here only that what you define in your class you can use, right? So you can see I have only 3 variables here. I can only use 3 variables and no more. That's it for my house class. That's not very much, but we will learn more. We will talk about functions and then about constructors. And so, but here, before I stop here, in the next video we talk about functions and then about constructors, probably too, because constructors are very important. But before that, one more word to structs. The struct here on about car, car, like I said, it's similar to class, but the only real difference is it has a public specifier by default. And here a big note. Why is this important in C++ programming? And I told you in the last video, they use most times structs for just plain data. What I mean is, if you have just declarations like this one, you could put them in a struct instead of a class, and they would use it rather here than here. And the reason why would they use just plain data rather here in a struct and not in a class? The reason for that is, it is here public. I have to write public, and then I have to define all these variables here, and in struct I don't have to write. And what advantage you have if you don't have to write public all time and write this here below? The reason is, we will talk also about this, is when we learn a little bit about initializer, which comes after the constructor, you can construct classes with an initializer, and you can direct initialize all the values, for example, which you have declared here when you construct here or declare your variable. But the problem is you can't do this with a class. And why not? Because class is by default private. With other words, you have to write first class, then you have write public, and then you can use this one as well with an initializer. And the car struct here is by default public, so they write here public, throw in all datas, and then they initialize a struct directly. This is also one reason why they use this, but the real reason is it's more historical because struct and the class are the same, and you will see they use it depends on the programmer. Some use it just as for data, like I said, and some other use it for classes. You can make all things in classes too. So with that said, I hope that I confused you much with objects, but in the end, we as a starter think about that. It's very simple. We think about class, just constructing. Object means just create a variable, and of course you can create many variables now with this class, and every variable name has its own you can fill it your own datas in it, and that is called an object. And that's a little bit the difference about a normal variable, I would say. For example, this primitive variable, you can just fill in it one data, right? This int house number, you can just fill it in one value actually. And my string here, this is actually a this is not really, but let's say this one here, one data, and my this variable name, which is an object, has now many datas, many functions, and so on. But in the end, it is just a variable which you can use, and that's the very important part. Think about it. So class you can't use, variable you can use. Variable, if you create an object, means just create a variable with the class, and you can use it. And you have your informations in it. So make it not too complicated, because I see on the web many people are talking. Many people are talking about that, and it's really simple and straightforward. Of course, later you will learn the difference anyway when it comes to the special places, and you will not confused about something like this. All right. With that said, I hope you get better. And classes will become more and more difficult a little bit. What I mean with that is we will expand, of course, all the things, but in general they are simple because you can keep it simple. But of course you can make them also difficult. And we will make it a little bit more difficult when we talk about things which are more complicated. Anyway, with that said, if you have any complaints or any questions, like all time, write it in the comments, and tips and tricks as well. And see you in the next, and like all time, don't give up. We get better and better. Bye.